3 years ago, my husband thought he was so clever, sneaking around with my best friend while dismissing my pointless little app. What he didn't know? That app had just received a purchase offer for $450,000. What he really didn't know? The house he assumed we'd split 50-50 in the divorce had been refinanced into my name only 2 years earlier. I walked into their romantic dinner and dropped both secrets at once. She dumped him before dessert arrived. This is how I accidentally became financially independent, while my cheating husband learned he had nothing to bargain with. This all happened 3 years ago, but I still remember every detail like it was yesterday. I'm telling you this story now because enough time has passed that I can share what really went down without my hands shaking. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old at the time, married to David Hayes for 11 years. He worked as a software engineer. I ran a small digital marketing consultancy from home. We lived in what I thought was our beautiful house in suburban Denver, a house I'd inherited from my grandmother, but had to completely refinance when we needed major repairs a few years before this all went down. Perfect marriages have a way of showing cracks when you're not expecting them. It started with the classic signs. David suddenly caring about his appearance again, working late more frequently, guarding his phone like it contained state secrets. As someone who analyzes consumer behavior patterns for a living, I'm pretty good at spotting when something's off. And David's new routine was practically screaming red flags. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March 2021. David was supposedly working late again, and I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the counter. He'd forgotten it, something that hadn't happened in months. I stared at that phone for a full minute, my heart pounding. Trust was important in marriage, right? But after weeks of sleepless nights and that gnawing feeling in my stomach, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The text was from Jessica Parker, my best friend of 6 years. Can't wait for dinner tomorrow night. I already called Romano's, our usual table at 7. See you there. That kiss emoji felt like a punch to the chest. Our usual table? Since when did David and Jessica have dinner traditions I didn't know about? I wish I could say I handled it maturely, but honestly, I turned into a detective. I started paying attention to everything: his schedule, his excuses, the way his mood changed after work calls. The next evening, I did something I never thought I'd do. While David was in the shower, I checked his laptop calendar. There it was. Client meeting, Romano's, 7 p.m. My hands were literally trembling as I scrolled through more entries. 4 client meetings in the past 6 weeks, all perfectly coinciding with times Jessica had been swamped with work when I'd tried to make plans. I felt physically sick, not just betrayed, actually nauseous. I couldn't eat for 3 days and lost 7 pounds from pure stress. Sleep became impossible without wine, and even then I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It forces clarity. While I was spiraling, I kept thinking about something David always said when I talked about my business. "That's nice, honey, but when are you going to focus on making real money?" See, for the past 3 years, I'd been quietly developing something, while he dismissed it as my cute little hobby. A social media management platform called ConnectScope that helped small businesses streamline their online presence. David knew about it, but every time I tried to discuss revenue projections or business strategy, he'd literally change the subject or make some comment about playing entrepreneur. What he didn't know was that a few weeks earlier, I'd received a serious acquisition offer. A mid-sized marketing firm wanted to buy ConnectScope for $450,000. I'd been planning to surprise him with champagne and discuss our future plans. Instead, I was planning something entirely different. Before I did anything drastic, I tried the mature approach. 3 days after discovering the texts, I sat David down for what I thought would be an honest conversation. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He looked up from his laptop, and I could see the slight panic in his eyes. Sure, what's up? Are you having an affair? The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Sarah, that's ridiculous. You're being paranoid. I've been working on this huge project at work, you know that. I'm barely having dinner with clients, and you think I'm having an affair? With Jessica? His face went white, then immediately red. Jessica? My God, Sarah, she's your friend. That's insane. You need to trust me. But he never actually said no. He deflected. He made me feel crazy. But he never once said, I am not having an affair with Jessica. I knew then that a private conversation wasn't going to get me the truth. It was just going to get me more gaslighting. The decision to confront them publicly wasn't planned. 2 days after our conversation, I was driving aimlessly after another sleepless night, trying to process the fact that my marriage was probably over. I found myself in Romano's parking lot at 7:15 p.m., and through the window, I could see them at table 12, the same table David and I had sat at for our last anniversary. Seeing them together, laughing and relaxed like they belonged together, something inside me just snapped. Not with rage, but with absolute clarity. They were casually dismantling my life over breadsticks while I was at home questioning my sanity. My hands were shaking as I walked in, but my voice was steady when I approached their table. Well, this is interesting. They both looked up, and I've never seen two people turn that shade of white so fast. David actually knocked over his water glass. The sound of ice hitting the floor made the whole restaurant look over. Sarah, he stammered. What are you doing here? Funny story, I said, pulling out a chair from a nearby table. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to sit down. I was driving around, processing some news, when I remembered. This is where we had our anniversary dinner last year. Imagine my surprise finding you here with Jessica, having what looks like a very intimate conversation. Jessica looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Sarah, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, despite my heart hammering in my chest. But let me save you both the trouble. You're sleeping with my husband. He's been lying to both of us for months, and you both thought I was too naive to figure it out. Did I miss anything? A few nearby tables had definitely stopped talking to listen. David was frantically looking around, clearly mortified by the public scene. "Sarah, please," he hissed. "Can we discuss this at home?" "You know what's funny, David?" I said, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. "I actually came here to tell you about some exciting news. Remember Connect Scope? My little hobby that you said would never amount to anything?" His expression shifted slightly. "What about it?" "Well, I got some interesting news a few weeks ago." I showed him the email from my business lawyer. "Turns out my cute little project just received a purchase offer for $450,000. The silence at our table was deafening. David's mouth literally fell open. Jessica's eyes went wide as she looked between us. $450,000? David whispered. "That's right. And here's the really interesting part. Since you always said it was just a hobby and never wanted to be involved in the business side, it's 100% mine. Every single penny." I watched David's brain trying to process this. I could practically see him calculating what this meant for our divorce settlement, for his future with Jessica. "But Sarah," he said, his voice suddenly much softer, "this is incredible news. We should celebrate together. This changes everything for us." "You're absolutely right," I said. "It changes everything. But not the way you think." I turned to Jessica, who looked genuinely sick. "Jessica, I'm curious. When David was telling you about our life together, about your future plans, what exactly did he say about our finances?" She opened and closed her mouth several times. We never really, because I'm betting he told you about his salary, about our house, about the comfortable life you'd be stepping into. I'm betting he made it sound like he was quite the catch. Successful engineer, beautiful home, stable future. David was starting to look panicked. "Sarah, what are you getting at?" "Well, here's another interesting thing about our beautiful house, David. You know the one you always call our biggest investment? The one you've been assuming we'd split 50-50? I paused, my heart racing, but my voice growing stronger. "A few years ago, when we needed that major roof and foundation work, remember how stressed we were about the mortgage? You were traveling so much for work that I handled all the refinancing paperwork myself. And since my credit score was higher and my business income was growing, the bank suggested putting the new loan entirely in my name for better rates." The color drained from David's face completely. But we both live there. Living somewhere and owning it are two very different things, David. So let's recap what Jessica here is actually getting. I took a shaky breath. You have your salary, your car payment, and apparently a girlfriend who's about to discover that her successful catch will be moving into a studio apartment and looking for a roommate to split utilities. I looked directly at Jessica. "So tell me, Jess, how does David look to you now? Still excited about building a future with someone who'll be starting over at 38 with nothing but his paycheck and his conscience?" Jessica's face had gone from white to green. She was staring at David like she'd never seen him before. "You told me the house was in both your names," she whispered to him. "You said we'd have security, that we'd be building something together." "I thought it was in both names," David protested, his voice getting desperate. "Sarah, you never told me about the refinancing details." I tried to discuss the paperwork with you multiple times, I said, my voice finally breaking slightly. Every time I brought up legal documents or financial planning, you'd say you trusted me to handle the boring stuff while you focused on your important career. Well, congratulations, David. Your dismissiveness just cost you everything. I stood up on unsteady legs, my resolve solid despite my shaking hands. I'm filing for divorce next week. Jessica, he's all yours. What's left of him anyway? David, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. As I walked away, I heard Jessica's voice behind me, sharp and hurt. You lied to me about everything, didn't you? I didn't wait to hear his answer. I made it to my car with whatever dignity I could muster, then completely fell apart. I sat in that parking lot crying for 15 minutes, not just from anger and betrayal, but from genuine grief for the life I'd thought we were building together. The next month was brutal. David tried everything: apologies, promises to change, even suggesting couples therapy. But the trust was shattered, and honestly, so was my respect for him. You can't unknow that someone thinks so little of your intelligence and capabilities. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or keeping the house. It was watching Jessica realize what she'd actually won. Word travels fast in our friend circle, and their relationship imploded within 3 weeks. She thought she was stealing a successful man with a secure future. Instead, she got someone who'd be starting over at nearly 40 with nothing but his salary and a reputation as a cheater. David moved in with his brother initially, spending months apartment hunting and adjusting to a very different financial reality. I actually felt sorry for him, not for the consequences of his betrayal, but because he genuinely seemed shocked to discover how much I'd built while he wasn't paying attention. Jessica tried to reach out to me twice, once with a letter of apology, once through a mutual friend. I wasn't ready then, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever be. Losing a marriage and a best friendship simultaneously was devastating, even when both relationships deserved to end. Sitting here now, 3 years later, I realize this experience taught me something crucial. I had been living smaller than necessary for years. I'd been seeking David's validation for my ambitions, letting his dismissiveness make me question my own capabilities and downplay my successes. His affair was devastating, but it also forced me to see clearly. I wasn't the dependent wife he thought I was. I was an independent woman who'd been playing a supporting role in my own life story. The confrontation wasn't really about revenge. It was about refusing to be underestimated anymore, about showing up authentically and letting the truth speak for itself. Would I recommend confronting cheating spouses in public restaurants? Probably not. My hands were shaking for hours afterward, and I'm naturally conflict avoidant. But sometimes, life forces you into situations where you have to choose between your comfort and your dignity. I chose dignity, and it changed everything. The $450,000 from ConnectScope helped me start fresh. But honestly, the confidence and self-respect I gained were worth more than any buyout check. I'm building a life now where my ambitions aren't dismissed as hobbies, where my intelligence isn't patronized, and where I don't have to shrink myself to make someone else comfortable. David's betrayal was the worst thing that happened to me in 2021. It was also unexpectedly, the best thing. He freed me from a relationship where I was consistently undervalued and forced me to bet on myself in ways I never had before. 3 years later, I can honestly say, losing him was the luckiest break of my life.